I had Elizabeth Montgomery's phone number. And then when I met her, and I was so nervous, I bought 4 new tires for my car to make sure they looked right. And I said, hi, it's Herbie. And she went, oh, goody. So I reached out my hand when I first met her and walked into her living room and tripped over her coffee table.
Of course.
And she told me she used to get death threats and said, if you don't stop protesting the war, I'm going to kill you. We're going to kill you. And then Bill Asher, his eyes straight, God knows why, he's married to Elizabeth Montgomery, and he's looking elsewhere. Dick Sargent was crying on the plane because Agnes Moorehead had made him cry. ABC did not cancel Bewitched. Elizabeth ended the show.
Welcome back to the Factsverse podcast. My guest today is Herbie J Pilato. Herbie J is an author, actor, producer, and pop culture historian whose work has made him one of the leading voices in preserving and celebrating classic television. Born in Rochester, New York, he found both inspiration and comfort in TV during a turbulent childhood, forming a deep connection to shows like Bewitched and to actress Elizabeth Montgomery, who we'll be talking about today. He's a prolific writer and cultural commentator with books exploring the social impact and legacy of television, including the Bewitched book and his acclaimed biography, Twitch Upon a Star, The Bewitched Life and Career of Elizabeth Montgomery. So please welcome Herbie J Pilato.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. Nice to be here.
It's so cool to be here. Today we're going to talk about all things Elizabeth Montgomery, or now in my head, she's just Lizzie, because you just refer to her enough as that. And I'm like, oh, wait, I have to remember, I don't know her, but I guess it's okay to call her Lizzie, right?
Sure. She loved that.
Yeah. And well, which leads me right into, you did know her. You had a series of interviews with her. Was that like one of those, it took a while to come into fruition and then it was like, oh my God, we're doing this? Or was it like a fairly easy thing to get at that point?
I'm still thinking about it. I'm still thinking back, how did I do that? Yeah, she was a very, very private person. And what happened was I had written a reunion movie for the original Bewitched TV show. Because I, Jim of Genie, 15 years later, came on NBC when I was working as a page, and that was a reunion film for that TV show, which really took its cue from Bewitched. So I was upset. I'm like, okay, if there's going to be a TV reunion movie about a hot blonde magic woman and a dark-haired mortal guy, it better be Bewitched. So I was inspired to write the script, got it to William Asher, who was married to Elizabeth Montgomery in the 60s during Bewitched, and who had directed I, Jim of Genie 15 years later, which really freaked me out. And I said, how about we do a reunion about Bewitched? And Elizabeth was not interested in any way, shape, or form to go back to that film or to go back to the series. And that's when I said, well, how about we do like a book about the show, about the original show? I said, do you think Elizabeth would do that? And he goes, yeah, she'll do that. I think I can talk to her. And 6 months later, after he gave me her phone number. I had Elizabeth Montgomery's phone number. And 6 months after I called her, she called me back, finally.
That's amazing. And what a classic Hollywood style thing where you like write one entire project only to have to scrap that and just like get an even cooler project. That's always how it goes.
Yes. It's true. It's true. You've written a lot about classic TV and the people in it and different shows and actors and actresses. But you definitely seem to be, you are very much into the Bewitched sphere, the actors and the show. Was that always, it sounds like you were long a fan even before you started sort of writing about this, but what is it about that particular show and this group of actors and Elizabeth that sort of is the biggest pull for you? Well, I always loved it as a kid. I loved the show as a kid. I loved all those high concept type programs, Star Trek, Twilight Zone, the Munsters, My Favorite Martian to some extent too. But Bewitched, I guess, struck a chord with me. I loved that, she was obviously so beautiful, and I was always fascinated with the fact that she could have anything and any guy really, and she just fell in love with this regular guy, Darren. She really loved him for who he was and not for what, he could do for her, buy for her, because she could zap up anything she wanted. So that kind of always fascinated me as a kid. It fascinated me more as an adult, as an adult man. But as a kid, I was picked on, bullied. The 60s was very tough for, a tremendous amount of people, obviously, for the various horrific reasons, the Vietnam War, the drug scene, the assassinations. It was a tough time. And I grew up in an inner city neighborhood, and I could sing and I could dance and I could do things, very artsy, which are all considered very cool today.
Oh, right. It's like that's literally what the internet is now.
Everybody's doing it, right? But back in the 60s in my neighborhood, you didn't need to be doing that. That was trouble. But so I kind of gravitated toward, Samantha's sense of isolation. She was essentially bullied in many ways. Certainly Darren was too from Endora, but there was a lot going on. And as an adult, as I grew into my 20s specifically, after I finished working at NBC again, I started writing that Bewitched script because I broke my toe, and I cut my baby toe. So I started watching the show again, and that's when I saw how really different, it was. Wow, this woman really loves this guy, and this guy has a very strong work ethic, and he doesn't want her to do the magic because what's going on there, And Dick York, the original Darren, had told me years later that the reason why he never wanted, or that he told himself this as an actor to interpret the role. He said, Darren never wanted Samantha to do the magic because he didn't want anybody else to have her.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want anybody else to see it because he wanted her all to himself, which is obviously something you would not think about because people are generally like, Darren, come on, let her do the magic. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, right. And that's a better answer than that kind of ruins the show.
Exactly. Well, early on, they had wanted Samantha to become less magical the more she didn't use her magic. And everybody was like, well, what good is that? You're not going to have a show about a witch and a mortal. You're going to have a show about two mortals. So that was, next.
Yeah, probably for the best. That's, So it's fascinating that, so even as an adult, the themes and the sort of vibe of the show still hung for you as important, as opposed to, when I was a kid, I really liked the setup of the show, but as an adult, I really started looking into who is this actress? Who are these actors? But even as an adult, it carried such weight for you as like, no, this is important. I was reminded when you're talking about your childhood, I feel like there's a story of I think Billy Joel would say, like, he learned how to fight because he would have to walk to his piano lessons, and people would pick on him. Oh, you're going to piano. And I feel like I've heard him say that. And so he's like, so I had to learn how to box also, just so I wouldn't get beat up trying to do art.
That's wild. That's wild. Yeah. Well, I certainly formed the Classic TV Preservation Society partially too because of Elizabeth, because she was such an amazing human being who was probably one of the least arrogant people I have met in and outside of the entertainment industry. And she came from a very prestigious family. Her father was Robert Montgomery. Her mother was a Broadway star, Elizabeth Allen. And they could have easily raised her to be arrogant, and she wasn't. She reveled in the regular life. She used her persona, her public persona, to help those the less fortunate. She was one of the first Hollywood people to really offer her assistance and help in any way she could for those suffering from AIDS. Her and Elizabeth Taylor were two of the big celebrities who did that. So I was inspired by her approachableness to do something positive. Usually you form a nonprofit, at least when I did. Usually at that time you do that when you're retired or later in life. I did it I was in my 40s. Why am I forming this nonprofit? You want to make a profit. You want to have money. So the charitableness of who she was as a human being inspired me to do that.
That's great. And that certainly comes across in the book. There's definitely, although, I was glad you didn't, it wasn't sort of some sort of sugar-coated thing. I mean, you addressed some of the issues that she had, and yes. Were candidly, talked. And I want to talk through, as many as we can over the course of our conversation. But I did want to ask you, and I assume the answer is yes, is like, was the process of writing this made you love her even more? I assume your admiration for her, even though as you sort of looked into, some friendships and maybe potential alcohol issues or whatever, things like that, I get the sense, I would assume, that you thought even higher of her having written.
No, absolutely. I mean, when I first met her at her house, after she called me, and I missed her phone call because I went to do the laundry in my little hotel. It was a little apartment in Santa Monica. They had like the laundry room on the bottom floor. So I missed, and I've been waiting for a call forever. And she finally calls, and I go to the laundry, and she's like, I said, "I'm so sorry, Elizabeth, that I missed your phone call." I said, "I was doing my laundry," and she said, "As you should." Yeah. So I thought that was like, wow, just like a regular person. So I'm forgetting the question as I went back to it. What was your
Just that your take on her was only improved by doing the process.
Completely. I mean, when I had that conversation with her just on that first phone call, I was like, wow, she's so cool. And then when I met her and I was so nervous, I bought 4 new tires for my car to make sure they looked right, and it was just crazy. So I walk, she greets me at the door. She actually, when I rang the bell, she had one of those long driveways where they have the speaker and got to say who it is. And I said, "Hi, it's Herbie." And she went, "Oh, goody." So I had already impressed her and put her at ease just on the phone. So she was looking forward.
That's great.
To this meeting.
That's cool.
So I reached out my hand when I first met her and walked into her living room and tripped over her coffee table.
Of course. We got to have some comedy in there. She's a comedy star.
So we both laughed, and it was kind of like broke the ice. As I broke my ankle almost, we broke the ice. And she was great.
That's great. And that is another thread that you have in the book of just that she was not somebody who was, on set and off, but on set too, she was a warm person who was not, she was very aware of everybody around set, what they were doing, wanted to learn from them, and also wanted to make sure that everybody felt good. She felt like, and I've heard that said before, that the lead on a show really sets the tone for what everyone's experience from, the cast, the crew, everyone else. And it seems like she was exactly who you'd want on your set.
Absolutely. She and Bill Asher both really rode that show, and they wanted to create a welcoming set. And, when you watch the show and you see Samantha, or Elizabeth as Samantha, that's who Elizabeth was. She was Samantha. She was that. Originally it was like Tammy Grimes who had been approached to play Samantha, and Tammy said no, and Elizabeth said yes. And when I give interviews, I usually say we would not be having this conversation if Tammy Grimes had played Samantha on Bewitched. It's the truth. She brought something so real and magical to that role. She made you believe and like witches because she was so believable and likable in that role.
Yeah. So let's begin a little bit further back. So then it's an interesting thing to hear about her childhood with regard to her father, who obviously was a famous actor and an important Hollywood figure. But, maybe more importantly is the fact that he was a very staunch right-wing advocate politically and well known as such. And she did not feel that way. It feels very now, with families who are very split in our divided country. But I guess, this was before I was born, but I guess it shows you this has always been a thing that happens. Sometimes families are divided by politics, friends are divided by politics. Can you talk a little bit about your sense of what that was like for her as a child?
Yeah, it was, she loved her father, but they had a love, not like relationship. He was not only just this conservative Republican to her liberal Democrat-ness, but they butted heads on many different things. He was very strict. She wanted to be a regular person and go to the movies and with her friends. He would not let her go to the movies. He did not want her to go to whatever that was about. And she was like, well, Bobby and Sissy can go. I don't care what Bobby and Sissy are doing. And yet at the same time, if she behaved in any arrogant way, and she told me this directly, if she behaved in any arrogant way, he would have had none of it. So it was such a complex relationship. And years later, after she became this actress, which he never wanted her to do, but then ended up making her debut on his show, which was Robert Montgomery Presents, an anthology which was very, very popular at the time. She made her debut on an episode called Top Secret. So there you go. And then years after that, when Bewitched came along, and she became a bigger star on TV than he ever was in the films, there was another wedge between it. And then she had asked him to do the narration for the pilot. He said no, and that hurt her. And then she asked him to play her father on the show, Maurice, who was later played by Morris Evans, and he said no. So it was strange. And then even after that show ended, when she did The Legend of Lizzie Borden, that really hurt him. That really freaked him out, because that film was about a woman who murdered horribly her father and stepmother. And when Robert Montgomery left Elizabeth's mother, Elizabeth Allen, for another Elizabeth with Elizabeth Harkness, who was a heiress, it hurt Elizabeth very much, and she resented her father for a very long time. So when she did Lizzie Borden, he was like, oh, yeah, you would do that movie.
Yeah, point taken.
So I know I just gave you a lot there to quote from, but
it's. I think I can't remember if it was a direct quote from him or somebody else talking about him, but he was very aware of not very much the well, I didn't have anybody helping me, so I'm not going to go bend over backwards to help my daughter be a star or whatever. And she, at the same time, I think, maybe through resignation, that he's not going to do this for me, but it seemed like she was back and forth sometimes going no, I need to be my own person. I need to do this. But then I think there was one quote from her. It was sort of yes, of course, nepotism has helped me. And, I may not be here if my father wasn't a famous actor, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I think he really felt that kind of you got to do it on your own vibe.
I think so. And yet he really still didn't want her. He really, really didn't want her to do it. He wanted her not to be in the industry, only because a part of him knew how much it takes and how it rips you away from the regular life. And he, in a way, did not want her to go through that. But when she finally just convinced him that, look, I'm just going to do this thing, then he embraced it. Then he encouraged it. And then he supported her. And until she became a bigger star than he did. Yeah, he would visit her on the set and stuff. And they still, of course, stayed in contact. But it was always a challenging relationship.
One of the things you mentioned, going into that field, it can make it really hard for relationships and family. But she really did, it seems, manage to balance family. Obviously, I want to get into her various marriages and stuff, but she had 3 kids, and she was very much known for I'm here to, and she and Bill Asher, I think, said we're here to work so that we can go spend time with our family on the weekends. And so she had kids while on the show that they wrote into, so it seems maybe because her father's warnings of if you become a Hollywood star, it's going to ruin your time and your family, whatever, or just because she was naturally like that, she seemed really to be interested in I'm going to have a balance and family comes first.
No, absolutely. And her kids, she and Bill raised her children just as down to earth as she really was in her life. And Billy Asher Jr., although he's not really a junior, it's Bill Asher, Robert Montgomery and Rebecca Asher, Robert Asher and Rebecca Asher, who, by the way, is a great director, TV and film director. So, yeah, she raised her kids in much the same way that she was raised by her father. And she never thought she was a great mother, but you talk to her kids and they just say that they adored her. Billy told me that when he wanted to be an actor, she said, do you really want to do this? So she kind of did what her dad did, but with more affection. It's a tough industry. Do you really want to do this? So that's when he decided not to. And she did not want her kids to really become actors. Rebecca, as a director, that's different. But she didn't want Billy to be an actor.
Yeah, it's a reasonable thing because it is so hard, and it can make for emotional torment both within and
Well,
externally.
she became a superstar. I mean,
Yeah.
of that era, she was a superstar. And I think she probably went through more challenges in the public eye than her father did. For example, she protested the Vietnam War. And she told me she used to get death threats from, in
Wow.
phone calls and said, if you don't stop protesting the war, I'm going to kill you. We're going to kill you.
Yeah.
So, and she was very private as it was, and I don't think she had really expected Bewitched to be as popular as it became. She and Bill wanted to do that show because a TV show lent to a more regular life, a more 9 to 5-ish, 9 to 12-ish life. They were doing films together. They did like Johnny Cool in 1963, the year before Bewitched debuted. He directed, she starred. So they wanted to do something that would keep them more family geared, and the TV show was ultimately the reason they did it.
And she was certainly strong-willed. I mean, I'm reminded of. I mean, she took a stand when they were about to make the show. I think it was so that Bill could direct season 1, or at least the pilot. And then she said, "I'm not going to do it." So then, of course, they started looking at other actresses, and then she kind of came back with a mea culpa. Just okay, fine. Your point taken. So she pushed up to that point, and then probably wisely said, "All right, well, it could still be a good show, even if we have a different director to start." But even to me, especially as an actress in that era, like it takes a lot of guts to say to a studio, "Hey, I'm going to bail unless X, Y, and Z." Even if you end up going, "Okay, I'm going to cave," but it still takes bravery.
Well, yeah, and especially because Bill himself was not at all pleased that she did that. That she walked out. He's like, you need to, because she was having issues with Jackie Cooper, the head of the studio, who was a former child star, and she was having issues with Danny Arnold, who was the first season producer who really wanted to shape the show and take control of it, whereas she wanted Bill to have more control. But when she walked away or started to walk away and told Jackie Cooper, well, it could have been a nice little show if I was involved or whatnot, Bill said, you need to apologize. You need to call Jackie Cooper and apologize. So even Bill was a little shocked that she was taking such a strong stance in not doing the show.
Yeah. And so prior to Bewitched, I don't have a sense. How well known was she?
Oh, gosh. Any TV show, any anthology, any drama, 1 hour drama, half-hour show like The Twilight Zone or Alfred Hitchcock, she did it. She made over 200 guest appearances before Bewitched, whether on stage or in TV. So she really worked her way to making a name for herself. The Twilight Zone episode of, I don't know if you know of it, with she and Charles Bronson is one of the
silent one. Yeah.
Yeah. Where there's not, it's strange because Dick York, Agnes Moorehead, and Elizabeth all did Twilight Zone episodes where the characters, if not didn't speak, they didn't speak a lot. Remember the Agnes Moorehead one where she's doing the invaders, where the invaders attack Earth, and I've
not seen that one.
Well, it's just crazy. So anyway, so she did shows like that. She did 77 Sunset Strip, where she played a biracial character. This is like, before the whole, the race rioting thing of the late 60s and whatnot. She was a groundbreaking actress across the board. And then after Bewitched, when she became the first queen of TV movies, on and on and on, she made sure that whether it was Bewitched or not, that she was going to make her mark, and she did.
Yeah, yeah. But like even having done all those pre-Bewitched, in terms of, I would assume, was she a household name, even though she was working a ton?
Not a household name, no.
But a successfully working actor.
She was a successful working actress, known within the industry to deliver the goods. She made, a couple feature films. The Johnny Cool I mentioned. She, the court martial of Billy Mitchell. Guess Who's Sleeping in My Bed with Carol Burnett and Dean Martin. Carol Burnett became a very dear friend. But, you know, it's different acting in the movies as opposed to TV. It takes a very special kind of talent, at least then, before everything became melded like it is today. It takes a special kind of talent to have people make you, or to make people feel comfortable about you, to be welcomed into their home. And she had that special thing, you know, with Samantha.
That's really true, because you can be a really talented actor or actress and really nail a role and get accolades, and it could do well, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like the people who saw you in that film want to see you every week or, you know, and doing anything,
Right.
and they can appreciate it. But you're right. There is that special thing that says, I want to choose, and especially in an era where it's like, there wasn't TV everywhere on the phone. People had to go sit down, make a choice. I'm going to watch this person on the screen each week. So you really have to have a likability and, you know, and be talented, obviously. Let's talk a little bit about, I was fascinated by some of the stuff, and it was towards the end of the book, you talked about, you had circled back with some of the friends that she had along the way, and how she was this like lovely person, but there was still a little bit, I don't know if there was just, she was quick to move on, or she built up walls a little bit, but it seemed like there was a lot of friends of hers who were like, yeah, we were so close for so long. And then suddenly I was kind of on the outs. I love her. She loved me, but I haven't talked to her in 20 years. Like those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, she was very, very, very sensitive. Very, very, very private. That's why it was such a big deal when she said yes to me, you know, and she trusted me. She even said, sitting down with you was like very therapeutic, because she felt that people didn't care about Bewitched. And this is right before, you know, Nick at Night and TV Land was hitting big with nostalgia. So she had really moved on. So she's like, why would anybody be interested in Bewitched? I had left it behind. So I had convinced her that people still loved her in that role. But she was protective. And if you hurt her, there were no second chances with Elizabeth, you know, and that's how sensitive she was, you know. Actually, when she called my house one day, and this is when I was living back with my parents, which was part of the reason why I wrote the book, because I went back home to care for them, where I could still be connected to Hollywood, back home to Rochester. So she called, you know, the house one night and to ask to speak with me, and my mother answered. My mother freaked out. Elizabeth Montgomery.
Oh my God, yeah.
And so I said, she's Elizabeth. You know, my mom kind of said, well, I'm a person. You know, I'm a person. So she embraced regular life, and she liked to be embraced that way, and she didn't want to feel threatened herself, you know, by others. So she's very, very protective.
Yeah. And she, I mean, she grew up obviously child of a star and with money, and went to good schools and had, you know, had a good, I mean, a bi-coastal, you know, setup and really, you know, probably didn't want for anything. How do you think that influenced, I don't know, her acting and her choices and, you know, who she was as an artist?
Well, certainly Bewitched. I mean, they did several episodes that attacked snobs and the arrogant. You know, I mean, and Dora herself, you know, is very, very arrogant. Wasn't evil, but she was arrogant. Serena became arrogant, Samantha's lookalike cousin. But a lot of the time, Samantha loved to really, you know, stick it to the arrogant mortals, rich, arrogant mortals. There was one episode, Snobs in the Grass, where Darren is dealing with clients who are part of this elite club. And David White's Larry Tate, of course, wants Darren to join the club. And Samantha's like, what for? You know, what do you need to do that? I'm very happy just, you know. So she would go and she'd meet with the wives of these gentlemen who belonged to this club, and they were all very arrogant. And so Samantha and Andorra end up getting all this information about each of these people in the club that dated back, you know, a couple generations, where they grew up poor. And Samantha and Andorra just reveled in exposing these frauds who were just really regular people, just like the rest of them, and had no reason to be arrogant. So,
Yeah.
yes, and with episodes like that, she addressed, I think, what she knew firsthand about private clubs and, the goofiness of such establishments.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about her relationship. She was married 4 times. Would you say, well, did she think her last one was the best? How did she, I mean,
Well, the way I look at it, her first husband was a sweetheart. He, his name is escaping me for some reason.
Gammon, right?
Fred Gammon. He was a casting director producer who worked with Robert Montgomery on Robert Montgomery Presents. And Robert Montgomery loved him because he came from big New York money and whatnot. And they were just both so young, and had they met later, that marriage would have probably lasted. But Elizabeth wanted to be a star and he wanted to have a wife. So the way I explain it is, the marriage went south and she went west, to California to be this actress person. And then Gig Young, he was a nut job. He had alcoholic. He would beat her. She enjoyed a drink every once in a while, as did everybody of that era. But with him, it got out of control, and she finally found the strength to leave him. But her father never liked that marriage from the beginning because Gig Young was like 20 years, her senior. And that was like crazy to Robert Montgomery because that was how old he was. So he was quite pleased when that marriage ended. And then Bill Asher, they met on a set of Johnny Cool. He had hired her, but she was late for first day of shooting, and it did not go well. It was like they started arguing. They kind of like not liked each other, and then they fell in love. And then many times, as with Sonny and Cher, Carol Burnett and her husband, Joe Hamilton, Lucy and Desi, many times, not all the time, but many times when a man and a woman get married in the industry and they work together, what they're working on when that particular project ends, so does the marriage. And that happened with each of the couples that I mentioned, and it happened with Elizabeth. The show Bewitched was not the same. It was not the same show that it started out to be in the 7th and 8th season. And then Bill Asher, his eyes strayed. God knows why. He's married to Elizabeth Montgomery, and he's looking elsewhere. And that really hurt her. And then she began an affair with Richard Michaels, who was another director on the show, and Bill Asher's protege. And he was really pissed off when that happened. But no matter what was going on in their marriage, they still made sure that their children were raised to respect both parents. They didn't turn one parent against the other, but it was tough. And then when she met Robert Foxworth, one of the things that fascinated her about him is that he never watched Bewitched, And she was like, wow,
Yeah,
and at that point, she was done with Bewitched and she definitely wanted to move on. So it was really attractive to her that he never saw the show. And then his first name was Robert, like her father, and she liked that.
Yeah.
But, when Robert Foxworth first saw her, they met on a TV movie called Mrs. Sundance. And the first day of the set, or first day of shooting, as Bob Foxworth had said once, she bounced on the set, and he's like, who's this? And they just fell in love. But she did not marry him. And he had asked her for years and years and years. And finally, unfortunately, in like just a short time before she died, she finally walked into the kitchen one day and said, let's get married. And he was like, what?
Yeah.
So I would say, in retrospect, Bill Asher and Robert Foxworth were the two true loves. True loves in her life.
Do you know if at that point when she said, okay, let's get married, had she had her cancer diagnosis yet?
You know what? That was never confirmed, but now that you say that, and I had thought about that too, I think she probably kind of did know. I mean, because she was sick, and she got sick, and she was hurting for a very long time before, Robert Foxworth and her kids are like, Mom, you got to see a doctor. So I'm thinking, yeah, she might have known and feeling something was up.
Yeah.
And that she would, marry. Certainly there were issues with legal issues with Sony about how with the animated image on mugs and stuff of Samantha that she was not pleased with. She had sued them, and she finally she won that lawsuit shortly before she died, and she did well with it. I think she did that for her kids, even though, I mean, she had $1 bazillion as it was, or at least a lot. So she wasn't hurting for money, but it was interesting how she won that lawsuit shortly before she died.
I think you mentioned that, and also that she didn't want for her kids even just to have to deal with, like, let's wrap this up so my kids, there is this issue with copyright and everything. So, but I don't want to burden them with a lawsuit that doesn't really involve them.
Right.
So yeah, I'm sure she was pleased to be able to kind of wrap that up. Especially if she knew she was potentially getting sicker and sicker.
Am I talking too much here, Tim?
No, this is great. I don't know. It's so funny. I sometimes people will, I'll look at the comments and then they'll be like, let the guest talk more. Shut up. And then other people are like, why don't you ask more questions? Stop. So who knows? You talk as much as you talk. I'm just trying to be here to, just to have a conversation. So this is great. And honestly, we have you on here because you have the information we want, not me. So after Bewitched, she was obviously this huge star, and I had no idea until I read your book that she was this queen of TV movies. I feel like she could have totally just been like, I'm done. I'm just like going to go be with my family and live the rest of my life and been fine. But she really worked. And talk a little bit about the types of roles she went after post Bewitched.
Yeah, she loved to work. She truly, truly did. And she probably felt at some point that she probably could have been a movie star. At least she wanted it. So that's, it was too late by the time Bewitched ended for her to do that. So she threw herself into films for television. But she made this conscious decision to do non-Samantha roles. And the first one she did was The Victim, where she was she was stalked essentially by George Mejiras, and she was in this like big house in the middle of the night, whatever. And that was the first thing she did, was The Victim. You never saw Samantha as a victim. And then she did A Case of Rape for NBC. And then she did The Legend of Lizzie Borden, both of which I still have not been able to watch all the way through, especially A Case of Rape. But there were 2 rape scenes in the movie, in the original script. And when NBC was negotiating with her about doing the film, they wanted to take out one of the rape scenes. And she's like, again, she, pulled her weight. She goes, keep both rape scenes in or find another actress. Well, They kept both rape scenes in. And she was Emmy nominated for that. She was also Emmy nominated for Bewitched. And she was Emmy nominated for The Legend of Lizzie Borden, but she never won. So I think that kind of hurt too. And I had talked with Richard Michaels about this. He had said that he felt the industry was jealous of Elizabeth. She was beautiful, rich, the daughter of, Robert Montgomery, prestigious, had a hit show. They're going to give her an Emmy on top of it all. I mean, her and Susan Lucci, right? No, I don't think Susan Lucci ever won, or did she? Did she win in the end?
I feel like she finally won after so many years.
She won something. Yeah. But at the time, they were neck and neck for being losers, in that. So, but she didn't win, I think, and again, this is something that Richard Michaels and I were talking about. She didn't play the game. She didn't go to Hollywood parties. She didn't care about that. She was a homebody. She was this superstar homebody.
It's true. And, you know, I feel like in more recent years, there have been either through just journalism or TV shows and film that show a little bit in the inside look and how people have to campaign for awards. And we see, and, you know, I'm sure the same was done. If she had been that type of person, the network or I'm going to go to every party and schmooze, then maybe you get those awards. But prioritizing family and not being that person is more important, ultimately, or at least was to her.
Absolutely.
And so she, you know, it's also impressive though, you know, you're listing off these roles in these dark TV movies. And I feel like not that many people are able to make that shift where they have such an iconic character. And then a lot of people do try when they get out of that TV show that they've been playing, you know, and they'll try to go do something darker. And then it's hard. It's hard for audiences to accept them as something new. And it's hard to get cast sometimes into something was like, well, I always see you as this character. She found a lot of success. At least, you know, she was working and was the queen of TV movies. It's fairly remarkable. And I would imagine also shows off her technical ability as an actor.
Well, she had always said that on Bewitched in particular, it was like 8 years of college for her. She really learned the ins and outs. I mean, obviously, you know, she did those other shows, but this is where she was in a position of control where she could relax a little bit and study the camera work, the directing, and, you know, the special effects for all of that. So she took all of that in. And, you know, people say, oh, well, she is this amazing. She does these dramas now, so that means she's a great actress. Well, comedy is not easy. You know,
comedy is so hard, yeah.
Right? I mean, Carol Burnett, again, her friend. Carol Burnett did Friendly Fire, which was about the Vietnam War, and she lost her son to friendly fire based on a true story. When she did that movie, everybody said, oh, you're such a wonderful actress. Oh, my gosh. Well, what the hell do you think she was doing on the Carol Burnett show, you know, for 11 years and all that comedic genius? So, yes, it was great for her to be acknowledged as a dramatic actress, but as an actress herself, she already proved her talent.
Yeah. And, you know, the people who make it look like they're not acting are always the ones that people don't realize are working really hard and are just putting in the time and effort, and that's the facade. You think they're not acting and they make it look easy. You know, you never really feel Meryl Streep acting. She just is, but she works so hard at it. So clearly she was, despite never getting the awards, her body of work shows that she was incredibly technically skilled, and as we said before, had that thing that made people want to watch her every single week. And so you add those two things up, you often get a very long and illustrious career. She's got a statue, you know, she's got an actual statue, not an Oscar statue or an Emmy statue. She's got an actual statue, which is probably even cooler. In Salem, Massachusetts. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Have you been there?
I have not. There was a reunion years ago of some of the cast members when that was erected in Salem, but I was caring for my parents, so I was unable to attend.
Yeah. I know there was a little bit of debate in Salem. I think you talked about in the book about like how much are we leaning into this witch thing, not the witch thing. And I think people were kind of like, yeah, but it's a sitcom. Let's not get hysterical here.
Yeah. I mean, when they first started the show, the ABC was concerned that people would think that Samantha was married to the devil when, you know, she would be a daughter of Satan. And, you know, Bill Asher finally had to say to them, guys, this is a TV show. If anything, it's a love story. It's about two very different people who love each other despite those differences, and they focus on what makes them the same, which is really their heart and their humanity. Samantha was the most human, you know, many times in the whole cast of mortals on that show.
I feel like if it was made today, the end of season 1 would be the twist that we find out he is the devil. You know, that was the 2026 version is that, you know?
Absolutely. That probably would be it.
You need people to hit the streaming channel, keep going.
Oh my gosh, you are so right. You are so on the nose. Oh,
but
sorry.
so talk. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you're so twitched on the nose here. So talk about the cast. I mean, she sort of famously, there was issues with Agnes Moorehead, issues in a different way with Dick York. I guess let's talk first about Agnes. What was the relationship like?
They adored each other. I mean, Agnes Moore had respected her even before she was on Bewitched because of Robert Montgomery. She knew where this woman came from. And even when, there might have been potential tiffs, they adored each other. One thing I do remember is when I was writing the book and I had met Elizabeth, and on some wall in Hollywood somewhere, it said, Agnes, somebody wrote in graffiti, Agnes Moorehead is God. And I told Elizabeth about that, and she's like, oh, she finally made it, huh? But one thing that upset Elizabeth about Agnes, really, and I think the only thing, is that Agnes was not too nice to Dick Sargent initially when he replaced Dick York, because Agnes Moorehead adored Dick York. Just had an amazing affection for him.
Yeah.
And so when Agnes Moorehead and Dick Sargent and Elizabeth got together for the first reading of the first script, Agnes Moorehead, David White told me this now. David White, who played Larry Tate. He told me that she stood up and said, I don't like change. So finally, Aggie was giving these kinds of digs to Dick Sargent for a great deal of time. And finally, Elizabeth called her over and says, look, this is a very difficult thing for Dick to be doing. He's replacing someone who established a role. So let's ease up on him. And David White, again, had told me when they went to Salem for on-location shooting for the Witches convention and all of that in the 7th year, that Dick Sargent was crying on the plane because Agnes Moorehead had made him cry. So it was tough. It was tough. So that, I think, was the only real issue that Elizabeth had with Agnes Moorehead. Towards the end, they both were, Elizabeth was Emmy nominated for lead actress, and Agnes Moorehead was Emmy nominated for supporting actress. At one point, they were both nominated for Best Lead Actress in a Comedy. So there might have been some rivalry there, because that was big for Agnes to be considered a lead in that role when really she was a supporting. So there was that. But beyond that...
And then Dick York, I think it sounds like there was a shift at some point where they got along great. She really liked Dick York, but then over time, I don't know, feelings developed one way and she kind of started to feel uncomfortable with him.
Yeah, I never heard any of that. From her, and he never said anything about that. But I had learned later that he may have had a crush on her and she might have felt uncomfortable. I can't validate that. All I know is the show was really about Samantha and Darren, and she respected what he brought to that program. And she also respected what Dick Sargent brought to this show. She really didn't even want to talk about the two Darrens until I says, Elizabeth, you have to explain, how you feel. People are going to want to know, what your position is on who was the better Darren. And finally she said, people had complained that Dick Sargent was not as animated as Dick York was. She thought that was cool because by the time Dick Sargent had played the role of Darren, the character of Darren had been more accepting of Samantha's magic, so he wasn't going to be as freaked out as much as Dick York was. So I thought that was a very diplomatic way of handling it. As far as... Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, nobody would have, I don't think, caused a fuss if Dick York had continued throughout. And then he started to be a little bit less, acting in the same way for that same reason. Nobody would be like, well, why isn't he as animated as he was in season 1? And the answer is because he's not as surprised by this whole thing. But if somebody new coming in, all of a sudden it reads like, oh, he's making a choice that, Dick York never would have done. But really, they might have ended up at the same place.
That's a wonderful, wonderful perception. Absolutely right. And Dick York told me that, number one, he felt that had he been given that summer of '69 to completely heal from really his, he became addicted to painkillers because on a movie called They Came from Cordura that he did a few years before Bewitched, he wrenched his back and he became addicted to these painkillers, and he was never the same again. His back wasn't, certainly. He had missed 14 episodes of the show, so the producers felt they had to replace him. But he felt, in perspective, he told me this now, had he been given that summer of '69 to recuperate, he could have finished the run of the show. However, Dick Sargent and he were dear friends, which a lot of people don't know. And Dick Sargent called up Dick York before he accepted the role and said, "Are you okay with me doing this?" And Dick York gave him his blessing. So there was,
Wow.
it was just such a complicated thing. And Elizabeth, as far as, when Dick York left the show, she didn't want to do the show anymore. She was done. But ABC handed her the kitchen sink, and, she just threw herself into it. And that first year of Sargent, if you watch, it's really excellent. And in many, many ways, Dick Sargent is kind of being like Dick York. He's trying to be more animated. And then they just let Dick Sargent do Dick Sargent. But as the show continued, you could, especially in the 8th year, Elizabeth is almost like dragging her feet, through the show. Bill Asher had started the affair. She was very hurt. So she was done. ABC still wanted to give her, 3 more years. And she said no. And she actually had a contract with them. She said, "No, I don't want to do this show anymore. I'm done." She wanted to move on. And that's why she did The Victim, Mrs. Sundance, because those were both with ABC. They were like left over to help her with the contract that she had to have done Bewitched.
Oh, interesting.
But she didn't want to do the show after York left, and then she finally did convince her. She was convinced to do it. She threw herself into it. And then by the time 8th season rolled around, even though ABC offered her more years, she didn't want to do it. And it's very, very, I want to be very clear here. ABC did not cancel Bewitched. Elizabeth ended the show. Everybody's like, well, it was on opposite All in the Family in that last year. And, it was murdering Bewitched. Elizabeth and Bewitched came in a strong second every week. She ended the show. ABC wanted to keep it. It did not cancel the show. She did.
Interesting. So let's talk. We have a few more minutes here. I do want to talk a little bit about her life. We've talked a little bit of advocacy, of being, a figure, a social and cultural figure, and what the types of projects and the type of campaigns she was involved in. Talk a little. We mentioned AIDS, but I guess we can get more into that as well first.
Well, no, she was, because so many minority groups, African Americans, Italians, Spaniards, all people were attracted minority-wise to that show because they also sensed Elizabeth's or Samantha's sense of isolation. The show really was a forerunner for diversity and acceptance, and it advocated against prejudice. So she embraced the gay community, and the gay community embraced her. She, of course, Dick Sargent was secretly gay while making the show, but then he became openly gay in 1994, 1995, or 1994, and that's when he asked her to be his co-marshal at the Los Angeles Gay Pride Parade of 1994. So they had this reunion of Samantha and Darren, which probably would not have happened, I have to say, if it wasn't for me, because when I had originally reached out to Elizabeth or to Dick Sargent, he would not talk to me until Elizabeth did. So they reunited. I brought them together, which I thought was really cool. And they became friends. And I don't know if he would have reached out to her or if she would have said yes to them communicating, to be in that parade together. So I'm very proud of that. I'm also proud of bringing her together with David White from it was Larry Tate. They met at her house because of me, and they had not seen each other since the show ended. So it was very special that I was, allowed to, number one, ease her mind about Bewitched and convince her that people still loved her, all these years later, all those years later, which was 1988 when we met in 1989, and that I helped to reunite her with David White and with Dick Sargent.
That's so cool. And yeah, people kind of assume sometimes that these people that they see on TV together, oh, they must still be hanging out all the time, forgetting that these are jobs and people go off and do their thing, and you may not see each other for so many years. So where does it rank? Where does Bewitched rank for you in the pantheon of I don't know, we could say of all TV or of classic TV? Like, is it your number one?
I got to say yes. There's TV shows. I have my top 10 TV shows, and then there's Bewitched, up there.
Yeah, its own thing.
Ethers, it's just such a beautiful show. It gave me a career. I owe my career to Elizabeth Montgomery, Bill Asher, and Bewitched. If it wasn't for them, I would not have a career. Because of the original Bewitched book, I went on to do books on Kung Fu, $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman. Then I went on to do documentaries on Bewitched and for the E! Channel and A&E's biography of Elizabeth. We did the Reels channel biography on Elizabeth. I became this documentarian. We did the new Bewitched Blu-ray, and I did the Blu-ray for the Bionic book, for the $6 Million Man, the Bionic Woman. All of that happened because of Elizabeth Montgomery. She was a complex human being. We're all complex, and whatever issues she had, I tried to deal with and address with dignity. I did not want my book to be a salacious book in any way, shape, or form. That's not my MO. But I also wanted to tell the truth. And I wanted to tell the truth with dignity, with integrity, and it's all laid out respectfully. And I'm very proud of that book. It's probably more of a fan book than it should be. It's not exactly the most objective celebrity biography. And it's maybe not what I call a foo-foo biography, where it's so literary, whatever. It's a good biography about a wonderful person, and it's written with passion and a great deal of affection and somewhat objectivity.
Well, you just said she had flaws like we all have flaws. And I probably said that exact same thing in my head after reading the book, because it's so, you were, obviously it had a positive spin because you knew and loved her. But it didn't, I came away with going like, no, she wasn't this perfect person. She reminds me of everybody I know, of some good, some bad, some complex, some not. And it's not easy, as much as it is a quote unquote, living the good life, being a Hollywood actress and having money. There's challenges in all fields and all situations, and going, she was abused by a gig young. She was, there's a lot, even in a charmed life, that can be really, really hard to deal with.
And when you're in the public eye, whatever issues you have are exacerbated. So that, makes things worse all the way. I can't imagine the kind of attention, that she experiences, or that any star of an even larger status goes through. I went on tour as a singer for a couple, cities. Like I went from Rochester to Cleveland and in Chicago, and did a couple concerts. And I was like, my gosh, this is a lot of work. And there are people, Frankie Valli, right, is still touring at 90, whatever he is, 90 years old. That's a lot of work, and it's a lot of attention. And I do not know where you get the stamina to do that and to deal with the kind of pressure that goes along with that.
Yeah. And she certainly, I would assume that the public's general sense of her is similar to what, you have, I don't sense that there's anybody who is the anti Elizabeth Montgomery crowd. She seems
I've never met anybody.
Right. Yeah.
Who has not loved Elizabeth Montgomery.
Including all the people she worked with.
Absolutely. And when I tell people, oh, I love her, that's all I get. That's all I hear. And what's great is, because of the way things are today with the various TV networks, doing the classic TV, the show is finding new generations, just like all the other classic shows. There's so many great shows that were great, not because they were classics, but because they were great. Yeah. Good is good in any era, and Bewitched is good.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. What are you working on right now?
Well, I was writing a book a year for 5 years, so I was kind of exhausted. So I've taken a break a little bit from books. I have one coming out called Car Poetry in Motion, Comedic Verse for the Autoactive Reader, which is totally different than anything I've done. But I'm also getting back into acting and writing scripts. So I'm excited about that.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. This was a great conversation. I had so much fun reading the book. I learned so much about Lizzie, my new best friend, Lizzie. And thank you for putting so much time and effort into that book and all the other stuff you've done. If people want to find you, what are some best ways they can find you?
Well, you can certainly go to Amazon.com to buy any of my books, Switch Upon a Star or Essential Elizabeth Montgomery, which is the sequel to that book. But if you want to you want to order personally signed copies, you can go to my website, HerbieJPilato.com. But I'm all over Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm all over the place.
All the places. Awesome. Well, Herbie J Pilato, thank you so much for talking with us today. This has been fantastic.
Thanks, Tim, for being a great host and allowing me to talk.
Thank you. That's right. I got to give you room to talk.